Hello, and welcome to Jolineknitsalot. This is my show about knitting and crafting and the things I get up to here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Today I'm going to be starting a sweater that I've been thinking about for a long time, and that's the Glass Cardigan. The Glass Cardigan is a beautiful top-down colorwork sweater that uses 1x1 colorwork and is meant to use up a lot of scrap yarns. I happen to have quite a large quantity of sport weight colorful yarns that I thought would be really great for this project. But I plan on knitting this sweater with a steek. I know that part of the allure of this sweater is that you don't have to do a steek, but I'm here to tell you that cutting your knitting isn't as scary as it may sound. And so I thought I would take you along as I start my Glass Cardigan. It's knit from the top down. I'm going to be following the shaping of the pattern and most of the pattern directions, with the exception of adding a steek in the front center of the cardigan. Part of the reason why steeking is appealing is that it allows me to knit in the round without having to flip my knitting to purl. So with a steek in the center of my cardigan, I can just knit around and around and around and not have to worry about working color work on the purl side. So that's one advantage for me. Another advantage for me is that it allows me to always be working with my right side facing. So that means that I'm always looking at the good side or the outside or the public side of my knitting. So I can see if I'm making any errors in terms of color work or shaping or whatever. It's all going to be always facing me, so I can see if something's going wrong. I have chosen some yarns to use for this sweater project carefully, knowing that I was going to be steeking this project. One thing that you can do to set yourself up for success with a steek is choose yarns that are pretty grippy. I'm using all sport weight wools, and I'm going to be using this Durum Natura Ulisse as my main color, and then I'm going to be using a lot of different scrap yarns, these and some others, to be used as my contrast color. All of these yarns are 100% non-superwash wool. Non-superwash wool has got a little bit more grip. It's still got like the little hairs from the staple of the sheep of the wool, and that allows the yarns to stick together. It means that the stitches will hug each other sort of on either side of themselves. It also means that over time, a little bit of felting can occur between the stitches, and that allows for a more uniform fabric to form as you wear the sweater over time. It also means that if I steek this, those stitches are going to also felt together a little bit, get a little bit stickier, and stay where I put them. So as I'm preparing my yarn to cut it and then actually cutting the sweater, none of the stitches are going to go anywhere. They're all going to be very happy to stay together because they're sort of nestled in and stuck a little bit to their neighboring stitches. Superwash wool can be a little tricky to use in terms of a steeked project because the yarn is a bit slipperier. It has had the little hairs on the wool flattened down either through a chemical process or through other processes, and that means that the yarn won't stick together when it's washed, but it also means that the stitches can be a little bit more slippery and they're not going to stay where you put them. I have stitched or steeked a number of projects in the past, and while the first few are definitely intimidating, the more you do it, the more confident you can be. And if you are interested in trying out steeking, I might encourage you to try it on a small swatch just to start, to see how the stitches behave when you cut them. Stitches in knitting tend to want to fall down vertically and not horizontally. And so when you cut your steek, the stitches really aren't going to go anywhere. But I'll show you that as we get going. I'm going to be starting this sweater with my main color yarn, and there's a couple of rows just in the main color which I will be knitting back and forth before I add the steek stitches to knit in the round. I guess the last and maybe most important advantage to steeking this sweater for me is going to be that all of the ends of the contrast color yarns are going to be hanging down in the middle of the steek. And when I prepare my knitting to cut, I'll be using some crochet reinforcement, which I will show you later, and that's going to tack down the ends of all of these yarns that I'm going to be using, and I'm not going to have to weave in anything. So if for only that reason you consider steeking this sea glass sweater, I think it will be a win. So let's get started. I'm going to be starting with my main color and doing a couple rows back and forth before I add my steek stitches and I start knitting in the round. I've cast on, and I used the numbers from the Sea Glass Cardigan pattern. So there is a set of numbers for your size for the front, the sleeve, the back, the next sleeve, the next front, and then I added 5 stitches in between all of those for my steek. So for this sweater, I will be using a 5-stitch steek, and that's where I'll be cutting my knitting eventually. Now I'm ready to start knitting the pattern, and so these 5 stitches here are going to be where I transition the colors. So for this first round, before I've even started any of my contrast colors, I'm just going to knit the first 3 stitches in this background color. On all future rounds, I'll be alternating colors for the steek section. So now I'm at the last 2 stitches for my steek. I'm going to start knitting my first contrast color, which I guess is going to be this yarn that I just randomly grabbed from my pile. I'll leave the tail in there and I will just start knitting. So I'm going to knit my steek stitches. Every round they will be alternated, and I'm going to be leaving the tails in the middle like this, and they'll be sort of processed at the end when I do my crochet steek. And now I'm just going to follow the pattern directions, working the increases where directed and working plain rounds when directed, and once I've got some progress, I'll show you how I'm doing. So as you can see, I've made some progress on my Sea Glass Cardigan. I think when last we talked, I was up here at the cast on. Why don't I flip it around and show you the direction I knitted in. So this is the cast on edge. I used the numbers from the pattern to cast on the number of stitches I needed for the front panels, the sleeves, the back, the other sleeve, and the front. And then I cast on an additional 5 stitches, which you can see here between my fingers, and that is my steek. So I have been knitting in the round, happily going along, and constantly knitting my steek in this pattern: the main color, contrast color, main color, contrast color, main color. My plan is to just keep knitting this until it's completed. I have been leaving the ends in, as you can see. I just leave myself an end. This white line here that you can see is the center stitch of my steek. It's this white stitch here. But if I flip it over, you can see it stands out on the inside. And then all of these ends are just the ends. I haven't woven them in, and I don't plan to. I know that some people recommend weaving in your ends away from your steek, so I guess that would mean in these directions. But I'm going to be doing a crochet reinforcement, which will capture those ends and allow me to just trim these off. Now, I'm not making that up willy-nilly. I have done some research. I do have a rather extensive library, mostly because a few years ago I did the Master Knitter program through the Knitting Guild of America, and I have a lot of references which I go to now and again. This book has been extremely helpful for a lot of my Fair Isle knitting. It's an older book, and it has a lot of different, I think I got it used. It's got a lot of different charts for Fair Isle knitting, but also a lot of techniques and advice. And as you can see, I've marked several things. How to design your own hat, for example. It's a great reference if you're really interested in Fair Isle knitting. But Alice Starmore, who I consider to be one of the gurus in fair isle knitting, tells me that I don't have to weave my ends in because they're going to be cut away at the end. And so I trust Alice and I am going to be using her technique to trim away the excess. As you can see, I'm not going to be weaving in my ends. It'll just get cut away after I've completed my reinforcement and cut my edging. So I'm going to knit on with confidence, as Elizabeth Zimmerman would say, and I'm going to be continuing to work on the body of the sweater as well as the sleeves. The sleeves obviously won't be steeked because I don't need to cut open my sleeve stitches. So I'll be doing another technique to manage the ends, and I'll show you that when I get there. I thought I'd give you an update on my sea glass cardigan. I've been working the body. We've got these steek stitches down the center, and I have been plugging away at it, as you can see. I put the body on hold when I got to the point where I had split for the sleeves, and I thought I would work the sleeves and then finish the body to make sure I had enough yarn and that everything was going to plan. Now, color management for the sleeves is very different from color management on the body of the sweater, because on the body of the sweater I'm just going to be steeking this center seam, as you can see, and I haven't woven in any of my ends. I'm just leaving them because in the end I will be cutting them away with my steeks. So this is all the yarns on the inside of my sweater, and I'm not going to be weaving these in. I'm just leaving them as it is, but I can't do that with my sleeves because I'm not going to be cutting anything on my sleeves. So I worked one sleeve to the cuff to figure out how I was going to work the color management, and I've decided the best thing to do is to twist the yarns, and I'll show you how I'm doing that on sleeve number 2. Now, as you can see, I've made quite a bit of progress on sleeve number 2 as well, but I'm now at the point where I'm ready to add a new color. So this is my beginning of round marker right here, this little gold marker. And what I've been doing is stopping several stitches before my row marker, twisting in my new color, and then carrying my old color for about as many stitches on the other side before cutting it. So let me show you what the inside of that looks like. All right, here's the inside of my sleeve. So you can see I'm just twisting away my new colors and my old colors, and I've got all these little ends here that I will trim, I think. I'll let you know when I get to that point. But for right now, I'm just leaving them kind of long so that I can kind of tug on them, as you can see. Tugging on them helps me to secure those stitches and to get them, to make sure that my stitches aren't loose at that join or at the crossover point in my sleeve. And I'm just going to leave them like this until I block the sweater, and then I'll have a look at them. It could be at that time I trim these a little bit shorter, but I don't want them to be too short, because if these little ends get too short, then they'll work their way to the right side, and I don't want that either. But this is how I've been managing the colors on the inside, and let me now show you how I'm going to do that. So I have been working one color with my main color, which is this cream, and one color with this really deep navy. And now I'm almost at the end of my round, and I'm ready to introduce a new color. My next color is going to be this really bright red. So I'm going to take my end, and what I've been doing is just laying the end across my other contrast color. So here is my navy yarn, and I'm just laying this red end across it, and then I'm going to work a stitch with that navy yarn. Okay. Now I'm going to continue working in the 1x1 color work pattern. So I will make a stitch with, I'm tangled up. There we go. I'll make a stitch with my cream. And now before I make the next color, or next contrast color stitch with my navy, I'm going to twist the colors in the back. So I'm going to go to the back, as you can see, and I'm just going to twist these yarns. Now this is fiddly, absolutely. It is not the prettiest thing to do, but it's allowing me to work all my ends in as I go and not having a mess of ends to worry about at the end. So I've twisted those yarns in the back, and now I'm going to make a stitch with my navy, and then I'll make a cream stitch. Now it's time for a contrast color again, so I'm going to twist my yarns. And what that does is secure that red yarn in the back. So now that I've twisted it, I'm going to make another navy stitch, and then a white one. It's time for a navy stitch, so I twist it again. And then a white one. And then one last navy stitch before I get to the end of this round. All right. I'm going to slip my marker and get ready to start my next round. But what you can see now on the inside is that that red yarn has been woven in, and I can give this a little bit of a tug so that it's nice and firm. And I have a long tail here. I will be trimming that off later. But now it's time to start making contrast color stitches with the red. So I'm going to pick up the red yarn, and I'm going to make a stitch, and then I'll make a white one. But now I want to carry the navy yarn over for a few stitches to make sure that that end is woven in as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and twist those yarns, and then I will make a red stitch, a white one, I will twist again, and a red stitch, and then twist, and I'll maybe do one more, and twist. So as I said, this is a little fussy. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I'm doing this on every round, but it is allowing me to work in all of those ends and not have anything left at the end. So what I'm going to do now is just take my navy yarn, because that end has been woven in and I don't need that color anymore. So I'm just going to pull it out, and I'm going to snip it, leaving a fair sized tail, because again, I want there to be a long enough tail so that it doesn't work its way back through to the right side of the knitting. Okay, and that's that navy yarn done. And now I can just continue working my way around this round, working one stitch with the cream and one stitch for the red. And that's what I've done for the whole first sleeve and the whole second sleeve. There will be a couple of ends to weave in, mostly at the beginning of the sleeve when I was picking up stitches and starting a new ball of the cream and starting new contrast colors. So there are a couple of ends to weave in, but really using this technique, which is admittedly a little fussy and a little time consuming, means that when I'm finished knitting all of my stripes on the sleeve, I won't have any more tails to weave in. So that is worth it to me. I've finally finished all of the color work for the body of the sweater. And I'll be honest with you, I'm excited about moving on to the ribbing. For the ribbing of this sweater, you can absolutely knit it in the round if you prefer. But one of the benefits to having a steek is that you don't have to purl, right? You're always looking at the right side of your work. And for the most part, that's going to be mostly knit stitches. Now that I'm switching to ribbing, that's not really an advantage anymore. Having said that, you can absolutely go ahead and keep that steek going all the way to the end of your ribbing. I am going to cast off some of these steek stitches and just work the ribbing back and forth. So I've already switched to my ribbing size needles, which are a size or two smaller than the size I used for the rest of the body. And I'm getting ready to work this first round. So I'm going to be casting off some of these steek stitches. Now I'm not going to cast them all off, and the reason for that is when I go to pick up my button band for this sweater, I will be picking it up on the outside of this column of white stitches here, and I'll be picking it up on the outside of this column of white stitches here. So when I work my ribbing, I'd like to keep that white stitch going so that I can just have a nice line to pick up stitches all the way around for my button band. So I am only going to bind off the center 3 stitches for my steek so that I keep this one here as a place to pick up stitches when I come around to do my button band. My ribbing for this sweater is going to be a 2x2 rib, which means I'm going to knit 2 and I'm going to purl 2. So because I have this extra white stitch here, and I will have an extra one at the end of the round as well, or at the end of the row as well, I'm going to start with a knit 3 and then purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, all the way to the end. And then my last 5 stitches will be a purl 2 and then knit 3. So I'm just going to keep knitting that one white stitch on this end and on this end, and that'll just give me a place to anchor my button band or my edging for this sweater. So the instructions for this sweater are to go around, knit 1 round. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on my smaller needles, and then I'm going to switch to my ribbing and I'm going to work that all the way to the end. So I will knit 1 round, and when I come back, I'm going to bind off those center 3 stitches, and then I'm going to work the ribbing as I just described to you. I've been working on my sea glass cardigan, and I've got all of my ribbing done at the bottom of the sweater, which means that the next thing to do is to get ready to steek. Now, I'm going to be preparing my steek by using crochet stitches. You can also use a sewing machine, and if you were to do that, I would use a straight stitch that went up right up through these 2 multicolored columns of knitting. You want to secure these stitches on this side and these ones here, because this center stitch, this white one, is the one we're going to be cutting down. So don't sew through that one. Sew through each of the columns on either side of it. I'm going to be using a crochet method. This is a method that I have seen in multiple places, but I first learned it from Kate Davies, who's an amazing knitter, pattern designer, and she has great tutorials online, particularly on steeking. So I'm going to be starting at the end where I bound off my steek stitches. So right here, this is where they were bound off. That's where I'm going to be starting. So I'm just going to flip my sweater around. There we go. I'm going to start right here with these stitches, and I'm going to be using a crochet hook that is slightly smaller than the size of needle I used for my knitting. So this, the body of my sweater was knit in a 4.5 millimeter needle, and I'm going to be using this 3.5 millimeter crochet hook. I use this crochet hook a lot, but it's also a good size. I want a smaller, slightly smaller gauge for my crochet than the knitting. I want my row of crochet to be firm, and I don't want it to splay out when I cut my steek. And if my crochet stitches are bigger than my knit stitches, then that could happen. The crochet could splay out. It's not the end of the world if it does, but I prefer it to be a secure and stable edge. I'm going to be using some wool thread, and I'm using this really bright pink color so that you can see what I'm doing. Whatever you use to do your crochet steek, make sure that it's not going to break and it's got some stability. So I'm going to be using this thread, which has wool as well as some nylon in it. This particular thread came from the inside of a skein of Wool sock yarn. It comes with a reinforcement thread included in it, but you can also get mending threads, which I think I have here. So here is an example of a mending thread. This one is just wool and nylon. It's used for mending socks. This one's black. I also have some brown, but I think this vibrant pink will make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. I'm going to start my crochet steek by putting a slip knot on my crochet hook. And then I'm going to go into the second stitch of my steek. So if this white stitch is the first one, the colorful column is the second stitch. This white one is the third, the fourth, and the fifth. So I'm just going to go into the top of this stitch at the top of my second column, and I'm going to do what in North America we refer to as a single crochet. So I'm going to pull one loop through. Now I have 2 loops on my crochet hook, and I'm going to pull another loop through both of those. So that is the beginning of my crochet reinforcement. Now I'm going to go all the way down this steek, and I'm going to pick up one leg of the colorful stitch in column 2 and one leg of my center stitch from column 3. I'm going to pull one loop through those 2, and then again one loop through the 2 loops that are remaining on my stitch. Again, this is called a single crochet, and there's lots of tutorials on how to perform this. So I'm just going to go all the way down each row. I'm going to pick up one leg of the colorful stitch and one leg of the middle stitch. This is one of the reasons I liked having the columns of my steek be very linear or very divided. So I've got a white stitch, a multicolored stitch, a white stitch, a multicolored stitch, and that helps me to see where I need to pick up stitches. So I'm going to go all the way down the length of my steek, picking up one leg of the color and one leg of the white. And what starts to happen as I do a few of these is that that middle stitch starts to pull apart. So you can see I've got my little row of crocheting here. This is a relatively thin thread, but it's strong because it has nylon. And as I do this row, you start to see that middle stitch pull apart. I'm going to be doing a second row of crochet starting at the other end and coming back down so that this side will also be secured. And then once those 2 rows of crochet are completed, you will see it's very easy to see where you need to steek. So I'm going to keep crocheting all the way down to the end of this side, and then I'll show you where to start up again to crochet the other side of the steek. So as you can see, I've done my crochet reinforcement along this one side, and I'm at the end. To finish this off, I'm going to do one stitch in the very bottom of that second column of stitches, that one that we followed all the way down. So I'll just do one stitch here. And then I'm going to cut my thread and pull it through. And there we have it. That's one side. Now we have to do the other side. So I'm going to flip my work around and we'll do that again. This time in the opposite direction. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little slip knot on my crochet hook. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing coming up, but through the other column of colored stitches and grabbing the other leg of that central stitch. So to begin, we're going to go into the very bottom of that column of stitches. And we're going to do one single crochet there. Okay, now we're going to start picking up one leg of the fourth column and one leg of the central column of stitches, and we do a single crochet there, and then we start just picking up those one leg of the colorful stitch and one leg of the central stitch, and we're going to work this all the way from the bottom to the top to the other end. And then when we get to the other end, we'll secure it the same way we did the first time. As you can see, I've completed both of my crochet reinforcements on either side of my central stitch. I've done that all the way down the sweater to the bottom of my steek. The other thing I did since I talked to you last was I blocked my sweater for 2 reasons. I wanted all of my stitches to sort of get comfy where they are and to have a bit of memory and stay where I put them. So I find that blocking really helps with that process. The other thing I wanted to do was to sort of let the stitches get to where they want to be, so that when I pick up stitches for my button band on the on either side of these white columns of stitches, that I'm going to have the right sort of gauge, so I know what how many stitches I should be picking up. But right now I am ready to cut my steek. Now you can see that doing that crochet reinforcement really pulls apart that center stitch, and you can see I have a really lovely column of ladders that I can basically just follow all the way up. So I'm going to get myself a nice sharp pair of scissors, and I'm going to go ahead and cut my steek. So I'm going to start at one end right here, and I'm just going to go in between my crochet columns. Now you can see I've got all these ends on the inside, and it could be that some of them get snipped while I'm cutting this steek, and that's fine because all of these ends are going to get cut eventually anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead, making sure that I'm only cutting one layer of fabric and not the back of my sweater, and I'm just going to snip. It's very satisfying. Now you want to be careful. The only thing you don't want to cut here are those crochet reinforcements. So staying away from those sides will help with the stability of your steek. Now if we have a look at what I've just cut, you can see I think the white threads that I've cut, they're not going anywhere. That half a stitch essentially is very happy to stay where it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut all the way up my whole steek. Pulling apart the steeks can help you see those little ladders if you're finding it difficult. So if you can see, I'm just spreading it a little bit so I can see where I'm cutting. And there we have it. Now, this is a really great time to see the shape of this sweater. So if you can remember, I was doing a bunch of increases here because this sweater is a V-neck, and now that I've cut that steek, this is how the sweater is going to sit. So I can see that nice V-neck that I got by doing the increases. That's all finished, and now I've got all these crazy ends here that I'll probably just snip back. And then, but before I do that, I'm going to be picking up and knitting my button band. The reason I'm not cutting these yet is that by adding in the button band on this side of this column of stitches and over here as well, I'll be providing just a little bit more stability for these yarns, so they really won't want to go anywhere. So I'm going to clip these all at the end. For now, they can just hang out on the inside of my knitting. But that is the shape of my sweater, of what it's going to look like, and I'm really happy with how this is looking right now. So my next step is going to be to use my smaller needle, my ribbing needle, and I'll just be picking up all of the stitches for my button band. I think I'm going to do the shawl collar version, but that's up to you. The one thing I will say is that the pattern recommends you pick up 5 stitches for every 6 rows. My usual is 5 stitches for every 7 rows, so I'm probably going to try both and see which one I like better. I'd recommend you try and err on the side of having fewer stitches than too many stitches. If you have too many stitches per row on your button band or anything that you're picking up along a vertical edge of stitching, there is a tendency for that knitting to splay out like this a little bit, and I don't want that for my button band. So probably I'm going to try the 5 stitches for 7 rows first, and we'll see where we get. Okay, I'm on the home stretch. As you can see, I have knit the shawl collar on this sweater. It was quite a bit of knitting, as you can see, but I think that I'll be really happy to have it. I've also blocked my ribbing and I've sewn on some buttons. So I've really done most of the finishing on this sweater, and the only thing I have left to do is cut these ends off of my steek, as you can see, and then sew down the steek. So I'm just going to take some sharp scissors and I'm going to snip these ends. I'm going to leave a little bit of an end. I always like to leave a little bit of an end because I find if you cut your ends too short or too close to the knitted fabric, they can work their way out to the right side of the work, and I don't want that. So I'll just be going along and snipping all of these ends quite close to the work, and I'll show you what that looks like right now, I guess. So I've got some very sharp scissors, and maybe I'll start on this side. I'm going to be very careful not to cut my knitting, and I'm going to leave this little end of my crochet bind off here. I'll sew that in afterwards, so I'll just leave that there. And these other ends, I'm just going to snip. And you can do a whole bunch at a time. There. That's what it's going to look like. And I'm going to work my way all the way up, leaving just a little bit of an end there that will be tucked under when I bind or when I sew down my steek. Well, I think it's looking better already. As you can see, I've trimmed off all those ends and the crochet steeks are just sitting there. Nothing's falling apart. But I think I'm going to tidy this up with a bit of a whip stitch just to work this end down. All right, now I've just got this little bit of the steek folded to the inside of my sweater, and I'm just going to simply use a whip stitch to sort of affix it to the inside of my sweater. Now this isn't a very large steek, and it probably would be fine if I didn't sew it down, but this will just create a slightly more finished edge. So I'm just going to use the same color that I used on my crochet steek on a darning needle. And I'm just going to go ahead and just whip stitch it down. If you have a little end, you can tuck it into the inside of this steek flap because it won't be seen. And any little ends that you may have can be tucked in. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a simple whip stitch, so nothing fancy. But this is just going to keep this little edge tucked into the inside of my sweater. And because the sea glass sweater has so many strands on the inside of it, because of the nature of the fabric that we've created, there's lots of little places to grab the fabric so that this whip stitch won't be seen. So I'm just grabbing a strand and coming up through the crochet steek, and I'm going to do that all the way up one side and then the other side, and then our sweater will be finished, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all done. Well, it's finished, my sea glass cardigan. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm happy with my choices that I made to steek it. I think that steeking it made the knitting process for me a lot more fun and a lot more enjoyable. I think that my steeks turned out really great. It was not a difficult sort of process for me because I have done some steeking before, but if this is your first steek, I think that it's a pretty manageable thing to do. To set yourself up for success, I totally recommend you maybe do a little reading. Try knitting out a swatch that you can cut to see how it feels and to get a little bit of experience with cutting your knitting. I suggest you use non-superwash wool because that wool isn't going to go anywhere. It's not slippery, it's going to stick. And so that's really going to be helpful for you as you start steeking your projects. I hope this video has encouraged you to give it a try, whether it's with the sea glass cardigan or whatever project you're thinking about steeking. I hope that you can find some time to do the things that you like to do. I know I plan on knitting a lot. Take care, and I'll see you soon.